Shae Bynes, founder and chief fire igniter of Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur, and this is the KDE Podcast Live. With a beautifully diverse panel of co-hosts, get ready for powerful and fresh perspectives of what it looks like to be a Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur. Let's go.
Let's go, y'all. Look at who we got with us today, y'all. The Shae Bynes, Chief Fire Igniter. And I am Latara Venice here with Phil Bynes and Alicia Hammond. And we are here for another episode of the KDE Podcast Live. Super excited for this one because we're talking about 10 years as a podcast. Shae Bynes.
I know.
It's old. It's well seasoned.
It is both old and seasoned. No, it is well seasoned podcast. It's pretty wild to think that we reached this point, but it makes sense. I mean, we hit our 10-year anniversary as Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur last November. So shortly behind that, celebrating the podcast. But it didn't take too much longer after we started Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur to start the podcast. So here we are. 10 years.
Listen, I remember when the podcast started and we call it the country house, even though it caught fire and we can't live in it. We call it the country house. And I lived in the country house. And I remember the very first interview you all did with me, I was in my sister's bedroom because I was homeschooling 3 kids at the time, not all 3 mine, but 3 kids. I will never forget where I was when this all started.
That's right. And that's when we had Amos Johnson Jr. and Antonina Aguirre, my co-founder, and I all together hosting. We were like the 3. You guys have a group of co-hosts now. Yes. We were a group of co-hosts back then. Oh, we called Amos the host, though, because we're like, you host, and we'll just be here.
That's right. I remember that. You guys was. See, so this is like just, a circle. See, life is a circle, y'all. It's a whole circle. Phil, Alicia, how are you?
All is well. I'm doing good. I'm doing very good. Let's see. My grandmother had her homegoing last week, so I traveled for that, and I grieved properly, and so I'm feeling good. I'm feeling better.
That's good. I love that, grieve properly. That's a lot of power in that. It really is. Really, really is. Alicia.
I'm good. I've been doing a little bit more baking recently. And so that's my happy place, and I get to film the podcast today in my mama's house. So it's all about home for me today.
I love that. Don't you just love the way, I love it when we say mama or mother, whatever we call our mamas, you can always hear the love. It was another word I was going to use, but the Holy Spirit gave me love because he was like, you can't even pull that word up. I was like, I sure can't. So I'm glad that, Shae, y'all know Shae been trying to get back on since the first time.
I know it's been like 6 months. I had to ask, can I be a guest? I mean, can I? Would that be all right? I got to launch a whole nother podcast to be in podcasting world. So you guys don't have me back around here.
Y'all gonna bring me back? What? I was like, yeah, we're gonna bring you back. Give me a minute.
Give me 6 months. Give me 6 months. No, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that you guys have been having that opportunity to rotate through the co-hosting. We've had some guests and all of that. It's just been really great.
Yeah, that's good. And wait a minute, but did you just say another podcast?
I did. I'm launching a podcast next month called Kingdom Over Everything.
You're not allowed to talk about that on our podcast. unless it's part of our family of podcasts. No, I'm teasing.
You guys can make it part of the family of podcasts. Up to you guys.
Really? So, really though, what is it about podcasting that you love?
Well, there's a couple things. So first of all, I love audio. So I love to communicate. And so communication can come in so many different forms, written, audio, video, and all those. And my loves are written communication and audio communication. There's just something about being able to hear the words, like the voice carries something, when I get to hear someone's heart and hear the wisdom that comes from them and hear them, it's different from when I read from them. And so I just love audio as a platform. And I'm actually going to do video with, just like you guys are doing video here, I'm going to do video and audio, which is the first for me. Video is my least favorite personal platform, but it's also a favorite of many others, which is why I will also be on video. My least favorite by far.
It is. Listen, y'all, whenever I do a video I want her to listen to, I go, just turn it over and act like it's just audio. So it's because the video, she just eventually, she'll be like, I couldn't watch the whole thing. Just on over and act like it's audio. Listen, if you're in the audience, say hello. We want to hear from you. And what I want to know from the audience, for those of you who are in the audience, whether you're watching live or you're watching a replay, is what has been, first I want to know, how long have you been listening to the KDE podcast? And if it's your first time, say first time. But how long have you been listening? I'm an OG. I'm an OG everything when it comes to KDE. I just want y'all to know. I'm an OG. I beat Phil out. I'm an OG. True. So how long have you been listening to this? Because I think that the impact that this podcast has had, because we've reached over 1 million downloads, right?
Well over now.
Well over 1 million downloads. That says a lot about the impact that we've had in the entrepreneurial world, right? Because, it didn't just go to Christian entrepreneurs or kingdom entrepreneurs. It probably hit people who don't even believe in God. So can you imagine the impact that this podcast has had over the last 10 years? Did you think it would go this long, Shae?
I did think the podcast would go long. It's just a platform that I wholeheartedly believe in. And so I wasn't surprised when we had to make the shift and I was no longer the host. That part wasn't a surprise, but it doesn't surprise me the longevity of the podcast. From my perspective, as long as Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Movement exists, I believe I would expect that the podcast would be right there too.
That's good. And
I think it's a foundational platform for us to be able to share messages, share stories, and all of that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Phil. So here I have a question for you. What has it been like? So you've been the husband of the host, and now you are, right, one of the hosts. What has that been like for you? Like going from the husband of the host, and then you actually had a little part, for the last couple of years at the end where you give your wisdom, and now you're like, boom, here I am.
What is it like? Wow. It's like being dragged into deeper waters.
Dragged.
I say that tongue in cheek, but it's been interesting, because I do have a gift of faith, and I like to go where God is leading. But it's definitely like going into these waters is not something I ever look to do, right? I like to communicate, but podcasts, writing the rapid fire email. But I do it because of what God wants to bring out of it. And so it's been cool. So I always love to listen to my wife. She's one of my favorite people to listen to. When she was hosting the podcast, I would, wherever she shows up, whenever she's on someone else's podcast and it's not like behind a firewall where I have to pay to get to it, I'm listening.
That's true.
I'm going to hear, even hearing the same stories. It don't matter. Like, because there's always a little something on it.
Yeah.
It's coming out of her mouth.
Yeah, that's good. That's cool. I love that, for a number of reasons. First off, Shae has that voice that's like, I've been told I have a radio voice, but sometimes I slip over my words and all other kind of stuff because that's just me. But Shae, she has this way, it's like it puts you to sleep. You could be sitting there, and I tell people, who say I'm gonna listen to Grace Over Grind, I'd be like, listen, make sure, don't lay down and listen, because
I've literally never heard someone say that my voice put them to sleep. This is a first for me.
Your voice is very subtle and calming, right? And I can't lay down and listen to you because it's like a bedtime story.
That is hilarious.
I gotta say that's pretty accurate. You could totally record one of those Matthew McConaughey, like, let me read you to sleep things, except for, Grace Over Grind, or
that's hilarious.
I agree with that. Very soothing. But that might be just because I know how you give hugs. And so whenever I hear your voice, it's like a hug. I know that, like,
Yeah.
it was snappy, but it's true.
Audio hug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Alicia, how has it been for you being one of you and I think were two of the most interviewed people in the tenure of the podcast. We OGs.
Yep.
We OGs. And so how's it been for you, like going from guest and then you were asked to become a host? What was that like?
Well, I'll say, first of all, with the very first time I was a guest, I was so nervous. But the thing that Shae is gifted at is being able to just pull things out of people and make it just a conversation. So I found myself really quickly becoming very comfortable with this platform and just having conversation. I love where we're at now, especially because we get to just have a conversation and, audience can join in or audience can listen later and join in, but it's just really fun for me. And I think it's maybe one of the things I enjoy most about being a part of the KDE community.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And before we keep going, real quick, in the audience, listen, y'all might have came in late. How long have you been listening to the KDE podcast? We're giving away a couple of things today. If y'all answer and talk, y'all might get it. Y'all don't answer and talk, I ain't giving nobody nothing. Now,
That's hilarious.
oh goodness. So Phil or Alicia, do either one of you have a question for Shae or just in general about this whole podcast journey we're on?
Let's see. Do I have a question for Sunshine? I like to call her Sunshine. She's my sunshine. Let's see. Sunshine. How has it been like, listening to your husband on the podcast? And that's a trick question because I know she probably don't listen to the podcast.
That's hilarious. I do not catch every episode. That is true. That is true. But I really do enjoy hearing you share. I enjoy hearing all of you share because it's nice to hear the practical application of kingdom-driven entrepreneurship in all of its various contexts, right? And so I love that this provides that opportunity. It's almost like there's a bit of kind of the teaching dynamic, the conversational dynamic, and then that practical expression of what that looks like. And so I think it gives a really good mix. So I enjoy listening to you, dear, as well as the other co-hosts.
That's good.
I don't care about the other co-hosts.
I know you didn't ask about them, but I understand.
Love it. What about you, Alicia? That was a very good question. And it's good to know she listens sometimes because I was wondering if she listened at all, because Shae, she do things different. And it's not that she don't love the podcast. This is just how Shae flows, right? So that's all. Alicia.
Okay, I've got the hard-hitting question here. My question is, and I would know part of this, but part of the answer, but maybe not all of it, is that, for those people who are podcasting or they're thinking about podcasting, like they think God has called them to it, I would love to hear you share what it was like for you going through that process of, God has given this to your heart, but there are growing pains. It's not getting you expected it to when you expected it to. And I want to hear about a little bit more about that, because I think that's a question a lot of people who feel called to this platform would love to hear the answer to.
So I think there's a couple of dynamics to that. So one is you're feeling called to it, which we did. There was it was an expression of this message. It was one of the things we were able to do early on. So first was just the commitment to just say, hey, we're going to have these conversations, and we don't know what the audience is going to look like. We don't know how many people are going to be listening, but we are going to show up and we're going to be consistent. One of the things that we made decision about on the front end, and it's what I tell anybody who's going to do a podcast, is make a decision to do a podcast when you have at least got to the point in your heart where you're like, I'm going to show up consistently with this podcast for at least 6 months to a year. Like, if you can't see yourself being consistent, and I don't mean it has to be twice a week or once a week, even if it's twice a month consistently, whatever that consistency is, if you can't see yourself committing to showing up with that consistency, you're probably not ready. So one of the things that we just made that decision on the front end is like, we don't know exactly what this is going to look like. We don't know how long it's going to take to have listeners and how quickly that's going to grow, but we will be faithful to the platform, right? So that was one of those easy decisions to make on the front end. Now I got to say, on the longevity, I definitely experienced those. Once we've been doing it for years, one of those like discomfort points would be when I'd see someone who'd been doing podcasting for like 2 years and they'd already blown past like 1 million downloads. I'd be like, we've been at this for like 7 years, you know? So I would have some of that tension sometimes. But it wouldn't take long to shift into God's perspective concerning the thing, which really had nothing to do with somebody else's podcast, right? It's like, what are you doing the thing that you're called to do? And so to me, it was just really about just being faithful to it, being consistent to it. And just like anything we've done with Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur, being able to hear people's testimonies was always a really great source of fuel to keep going. And we consistently heard stories. I mean, I would go to events and I would run into somebody who's like, oh, Shae, let me tell you about this episode of the podcast that I loved. I spoke at a conference and a guy from Mexico was like, look at my phone. And he shows me he's listening to the podcast, you know, a guy from, I was at a conference and he was from Trinidad. And he's like, I listened to your podcast and here's Grace Over Grind on audio. You know, it's just really cool to see because you have no idea how God's going to move through it, regardless of, the tension that sometimes you feel in the process.
Yeah. That's good. Those were good questions. Y'all so smart and y'all so intelligent. I just love y'all so much.
So silly.
See, today was going to be a fun show. Like really, really fun is what I wanted it to be. So I have a question for you, and it has to involve what makes a good repeat guest for you? Because I think I've done it like 5 or 6 times, and I think same with Alicia. Why did you ask us to continually? I've been on at least once a year.
So there's probably 5 people over the 9 years. I guess I don't know how long I was hosting the podcast, 9.5 years. There's probably 5 people approximately that were on the show more than 4 times. And the thing that drew me to continue to have you two, as well as the others who would fall into that category, come back, is there was something about the thread of your story and the development over time that I wanted people to have access to. Ideally, there would be way more guests that I spoke to that I could have come back so that we could say, hey, when I spoke to you 2 years ago, hey, when I spoke to you 3 years ago, that would be ideal with a lot of guests. But there were some particular guests where there was something about their story that just made me want to continue to go back. With you guys, I'm in relationship with you both. And so it was very easy for me to see the journey and I wanted you to express it. For those who weren't on Team KDE that I had come back, it was something that I would either be seeing them like on social media and just watching their development because they'd been sharing their story transparently along the way or something like that. And I'd say, hey, come back to the show. I want to talk to you. So it was usually just something that was in the thread of someone's story and how they showed up in conversation. Actually, this is a big one. This is a big one because not everybody is willing to be both vulnerable and transparent in a conversation with me. And those two things are really helpful to have a return guest because then when they're coming back, we can really talk about it from multiple dimensions versus some people who have a hard time being vulnerable or transparent in a conversation where essentially when they came back, you're just going to get, well, here's my wisdom that I want to share with you. Like this next someone, here's my wisdom I want to share with you, right? When I really want to get underneath the story, right? And so you two, I think just did a really great job, as well as the others I can think of, just did a really great job of being willing to answer whatever question I threw at you, just with authenticity, with transparency and with vulnerability.
I love that. That makes a good guess.
It does.
Because you don't have to pull and you don't have to go, because I've been doing this since 2005, interviewing people, doing podcasts. I've had some people when I'm like, Lord, where are we going with this? Because this person is like really tight-lipped. They don't want to share a whole lot. Or they want to be very poised and proper on the podcast. And I think that the best interviews are always those that are just, first off, free-flowing, and then you're vulnerable and you're willing to be transparent. Did y'all hear that? That's what the people want to hear. And I can almost guarantee that they were some of the most listened to podcasts that we've had over the last 10 years, right?
Yeah, they're certainly the ones I get the most messages about. Right. Yeah. So even if something got more listens, the ones that people would really resonate, say, "Oh man," if I'm out and about, or I'm giving an email, or I get lots of messages on social media and stuff, they'll say, "Oh man, I really resonated with Alicia, like your bakery story, because we kept that up all the way to having a conversation with you after you close the bakery." Like, I've gotten a lot of messages with people that are like, "Thank you for continuing to have her come back," because they love being able to track that whole process from the launch of the bakery even to when you close the doors to the bakery, but did that. And you're like, I did that also in partnership with God. Right. And so just being able to walk people's stories out with them, I get lots of feedback on that stuff.
Yeah, that's good. Phil or Alicia, before I go on, because y'all know I can spit all kind of questions.
Yeah, I have a question along the lines of the one that you asked, Latara. What are some of the things that make a guest not want to have a good conversation with on the podcast? Because I think the people need to hear it.
Wait, ask it again. Ask that again.
What are some of the characteristics of a I don't want to say bad, but podcast guest that is like, oh, this is not working. I don't want to have them on a podcast.
So you're talking about on the front end where they wouldn't even be invited to be.
No. When even if you've talked to them, these type of things I've discovered, like,
yeah. So I would say it's exactly what some of the stuff that Latara just mentioned. If somebody, and by the way, this is Shae saying this, other people might have different focus for their podcast, and therefore these things don't bother them. But for me, who's like trying to get a story, for someone who only wants to show up to say, this is the wisdom I carry and I want to share it with you. Like, this is my area of expertise. And so I want to share that with you. I'm like that. I don't want to focus on that. I don't, and if you're an author, I don't want to talk about all the goodness in your book. I want to talk to you about the life that led to your ability to write that book. Right. So I want to get underneath. So anyone who's kind of like expertise driven, if their motivation is, I really just want to get my expertise out there, for me, not a good podcast guest. Right. Because really what we're after is, at least for the first 9.5 years of the podcast, actually, I'd say maybe about 6 years of the podcast, the entire intent was to capture stories that inspired people to do business in partnership with an awesome and limitless God. Right. So that's a different focus than, hey, let me come here and tell you my expertise. And we get lots of, you guys are still getting them. I still receive them. A lot of people who want to be guests on the podcast, but that's the perspective they're coming from. Is I just want to share this expertise with your audience and I will be a blessing to them. Right. And I'm sure you would be a blessing to folks, but that's not the purpose of the show. Right.
Yeah.
And you guys have a different flow now, but even still now, it has its particular purpose and wanting to, stick with that.
Yeah, we still don't take those. So I'm sorry.
I wanted me to bless you.
Yeah,
I will be a blessing for your podcast.
Yeah,
I get a lot of emails still.
Yes. To which I respond and I go, well, I'm sorry, you're not quite a fit for the show and obvious, Yeah. But we thank you and bless you, right? Because that authenticity is really important, especially today when we're in a season where podcasts are not as prim and proper as they were. Again, I'm from the early days when podcasting started, and now it's like, look at us. We're just in our homes podcasting. We don't, we have mics and things like that. And there are things you should have, but the way people podcast is so authentic, and it's shifted because podcasting for the longest time, I was upset when people would call lives like video podcasts. That's not podcasting. But as with everything, it elevated and it grew, and now it's like really anybody can podcast. Doesn't mean any podcast is good,
right?
But with that shift, people are looking for a more authentic way of grabbing content and taking in information. Right now, I have a question to the audience before I shift it over back to us again. Is if you can remember any of your favorite shows, because I can remember my favorite shows, and I'm gonna hit on Phil and Alicia here in a minute with that. Mine's were, and I remember I was in the shower and I was like, oh my God, this is so good. Perry Marshall, I believe his last name was. Oh my!
One of the most fascinating people I've ever spoken to.
Oh,
yes.
The first 5 minutes, dude had me tearing up like, that's my brother. Where is he? I need to meet him. He does it like I do. I love it. It was him, and there was another guy, Jeremy.
Jeremy
He's here in
Kubicek.
Oklahoma. Yes, love him. And then there was another dude, and I believe this young man had a fencing company. He made fences, or
I can't remember his name, but I know exactly who you're talking about. Yes.
I loved all three, and every time I would tell Shae, now this is the type of episode I want to listen to.
Yeah.
This is it.
Yes.
Right? What
Yeah.
about you, Alicia? Those were some of the best.
Oh goodness, like you put me on the spot because now I don't want to get anybody's name wrong. But so there's
I might be able to help.
There's been two other bakers, and I want to say like okay, I can tell you her whole story, but God redirected her business, totally redirected her business, and she was doing catering and events. And that one, I for the life of me can't remember, and I have her written down because I've listened to it multiple times, but she was amazing, and that totally wrecked me. And I got to hear her story in that podcast in a moment where I needed it so desperately. And one of my other, I mean, I probably have a pretty good top 10 that I listen to on a fairly regular basis, but Praying Medic, like,
Yes,
messed me up. I feel pretty special because I get to be friends with them on Facebook, but this is rubbing elbows with the cool people. But yeah, when he came on the first time in particular, that just really messed me up. So
yeah, you went way back in the archives.
Oh
yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's why I can't remember. I don't want to mess anybody's name up, but.
Yeah, that's good. Those were great conversations. I just a little trivia or a little behind the scenes. There was conversations that I had. His name is Dave Hayes, that I had with Praying Medic that were so uncomfortable that I would not have them on our public podcast. Because me at that time, I was like, oh man, if we have that conversation, I'm gonna like all these people are gonna come after me and call me a heretic or something. But we had some fascinating conversations. Now things that I've actually encountered in the spirit, but at that time in my life, I was just like so uncomfortable with some of these topics of things that he was experiencing in the spirit that I put those conversations behind the paywall when we had a private thing back then, a private membership, but I would not put them on the public podcast because I was like scared that people were going to come with their picks or something.
She ain't scared no more.
Oh no, I'm not anymore. But at that time I was. And I told him so. I was like, yeah, I don't think I could share that one publicly, but
yeah, that's good. What about you, Phil? I know you have to step out in a little bit.
Yeah, well, there've been so many great ones. The ones that kind of stick out to me are the ones with the people that I know, though. Like Alicia, Latara, and Dr. Tony. Whenever Dr. Tony gets going, she goes a mile a minute pulling stuff out of heaven. So that's always fun to listen to those and just hear and see her pulling stuff out of heaven real time.
Yeah, and I mean real time too, right? But that's probably one of the earlier ones, Shae, that you would have been like, I don't know if I could put this one on. I'm about to put this one because it's so when she comes on, it's so supernatural. It's like, we always tease Tony and go, oh, she in heaven now. She'll be right back.
It was the first and only episode where I had a guest that like spoke in tongues for about half a second and it happened right on the podcast. And I'm just like, I'm gonna keep it going.
I remember
that.
I'm
not gonna edit it.
I remember that. And I mean, when we first started, you probably would have been like, I know
I'm gonna have to edit that. I totally would have edited that. And the first 3 years or 4 years of the podcast, I completely would have edited that out. Yeah.
What made you get comfortable with not editing things like that?
So there's this power team. I talk often about the power twins, faith and patience, faith and obedience. The third one is confidence and humility. All right. And so what would happen is as I began to walk this thing out and I was personally experiencing more, it was like at some point, the confidence in him and in expressing it was, I'm doing a disservice by holding that back, right? And so it was like, now I need to. So as opposed to being intimidated by something, it's like, no, and this is my service. Like, why should I withhold that from my family, whether it's something that I was having a conversation with someone else or something that I shared, right? That just kind of came in time as I was growing in that, in that myself. And that took some years. I mean, I was out here in Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur Land, still figuring out a whole lot of stuff. I'm still figuring out stuff. But I mean, if you go back and listen to the episodes in 2013, you can hear us working through like some basic stuff, which basic to me now that we were working through in real time. Like I was growing in front of people.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And the importance of it too, I think, is really that we need to understand that the kingdom is supernatural. So it's important that we get comfortable with those type of episodes, those type of scenarios when things like that happen. And it only frees us even more just to be kingdom, because the kingdom is supernatural. So yeah, that right there. So, but I get it, because I probably wouldn't have been doing this podcast a long time ago. I'd be like, no, I can't host that one. I'm sorry.
There are episodes that they're very, very few, but there were a couple of episodes that never did get released, but not for those reasons. For other reasons.
Yeah. What makes you not release an episode?
I mean, it's very, 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 very rare, but I had 3 instances that I could think of. One is that the conversation would happen very early on, where the conversation got so out of alignment with what we're about that it's like, we can't release that. Yeah. The second time it happened, I couldn't get the person to it was like I couldn't get anything out of the person. Like it was just, and which is for me, if I can't get something out of you, so it was so rough. And it was just like, I can't do anything with it. And then the third time it happened was I didn't even, with that one, it was going back to when it was a guest who on the front end, it looked like they really just wanted to kind of share it was an author who really just kind of wanted to share their expertise. I could tell the person had a good story. So I told the publicist, hey, I'll have a conversation, but be sure to let the person know that this is what I'm going after in this conversation. But what happened is that while we were having a conversation, we were pre-recording, this wasn't live, is that everything I said, the conversation would turn into, and in my book, I wrote X, Y, and Z. And so, and I mean, it wouldn't even be answering my question. I would be asking you a question, and then you wouldn't answer my question, but then would tie it into his book, right? So it happened a few times. And so, me, I stopped the interview and I said, hey, let's have a chat about how this is going. And so I gave a level of adjustment and feedback, but it never got better. And so I finished the conversation, but then I was like, I can't use this. So those are the only 3 times in 9.5 years of my hosting that we didn't do it.
And it's so funny because you could edit then. We're live, right? We're live, which is why I am cautious about guests we bring on the show.
Sure.
Because I have my own live show, and I've had a guest where I'm just like, she's trying to take this all the way to her platform, and that's not why we're here. Right. I want to talk about her story. So it was that, and it was funny because people can tell, because afterwards I got boxers and inboxes going, oh, she made that really hard for you, didn't she?
Yeah.
But you steered her back, and having to do that live can be a little bit more difficult, right?
Yeah. So, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. Alicia, you have any questions, comments? Come on, pop on in, girl.
I actually do. I asked the podcast, and this may be a question for both of you, actually. And I know Phil had to step out, so he won't get to answer this, but Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur about not being a guru. We're after Jesus and the things of the kingdom, and so that about idolizing or putting a person on a platform or a pedestal, and so how was that for you? And as kind of the you and leaders of our podcast as we have it now, to kind of shift and do the podcast in the way that fits this new setting and this relationship dynamic and what have you, as opposed to having the example set of how Shae did it. I'd like to hear that too. I'm a fangirl right now.
let me say, first of all, and Shae will tell you, I was like, I can't do that. Because she had already told me, I think it was near the end of the year, right, what was coming. Now, she didn't necessarily say that I would be her ideal host, but I know how Shae moves and I know how she flows. So she's like, I don't know who will be the host. I have some idea. And I was like, oh God, I think I know where she's going. So we're in a team retreat and we're reimagining. And I come up, we're reimagining this whole thing. And I'm like, oh, well, Breakfast Club, The View type. And Shae was like, oh, and you would be perfect to lead it. And I was like, and instantly,
and
that was like December. Right. I was like, why did I say something? But I couldn't get it out of my head because I'd already been dreaming about it when she told me she was stepping away. And I was like, oh, I can see this. And I knew it. I could see it. And I was like, oh, but then if you got to do it, maybe you shouldn't say nothing because you know how Shae is. But I couldn't help it because I kept dreaming about it.
Yeah.
So it was like the Holy Spirit was preparing me for what was coming. And then like this morning, as I'm thinking about it, I said, well, you know what? I said, and I'm not being cocky, who better than someone who's walked this thing out for a very long time and who has been a guest on the show. I know the flow and I get Shae's heart and God's heart for kingdom-driven entrepreneur. So it made sense. And then when I was told, oh, and you'll create, like, you tell us what it looks like and what we're doing and who's going to host with you? I was like, I don't know. So that took me to go dreaming even more because I had to go, okay, God, what does this look like? And, God's like, what does it look like? And I'm like, I'm waiting on you to tell me, right? But when you get in that point of relationship with him, when he's like, I trust you, you walk in my wisdom enough to be able to say, it looks like this. And I just kept seeing the view, different ages, different backgrounds, different cultures with a Breakfast Club type of, not the movie, y'all. There's an actual podcast called The Breakfast
Right, not
Club.
the movie.
With a Breakfast Club type of atmosphere where there's a lot of freedom. I mean, there's a lot of freedom on The View, but the Breakfast Club is way different. It's a whole lot of freedom. And that's what I wanted, is I want us to have a lot of freedom and a lot of fun. And I was like, okay. And then they were like, so what is the format going to be like? And I was like, oh, I got to come up with that too. Okay, so what does that look like? So I got quiet and God's like showing me seasons of what it looks like, knowing that, Phil is the father of the movement. Guess what needs to get out? The Father's wisdom. It needs to get out. So that's why we talk so much about the rapid fires that are in the newsletter, because that stuff needs to get out even more. Right. And so it was very nerve-wracking, but I've also been podcasting since 2005. So I'm comfortable, behind a mic, in front of a camera. But I was nervous because and I'm not stepping into nobody's shoes because I don't know how y'all feet smell or nothing. But
Oh my gosh.
Like sunshine.
I was stepping into a spot that had belonged to Shae for 9 years. So it was like, oh boy. Will I do like her? Will I not? And to which, I'm just going to be me. And Holy Spirit's like, you're going to be LaTara. That's who you want.
It's the only way to be.
That's it. So
Well,
that's what it's been.
That raises a follow-up question for me too, is that, and maybe it's not a question, maybe it's a comment, and you can speak to this, both of you, but what I've seen over the course of the life of kingdom-driven entrepreneurs is that over and over and over that the God has been preparing the people and the situations to meet the needs of the growth as it's happened. So you were talking about how God had been talking to you about this thing, and Shae was knowing that this was coming up, and he'd been preparing you ahead of time. And I've seen that over and over, that sort of thing where he's just prepared the solution ahead of time. And I'd like to hear, maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Let me, okay. So y'all know I can speak on that one because he done prepared me for so many things within this, right? Within the whole KDE thing, he prepared me for becoming the first, I told you I'm OG, the first mentor for the Igniters program, right? Yeah. And then he prepared me for just every level. And I remember the director of culture specifically. When Phil became the director of culture, the first thing I said was, I heard, and I thought it was me, like going, "Oh, girl, you just want something that don't belong to you." And I was like, "That's supposed to be me." But I backed away from it, thinking, "Okay, well, no, just move on, forget it." And in less than a year, literally in less than a year,
Yep.
Shae got into my Voxer at 6:30 in the morning, my time, and she started talking. And the Holy Spirit was like, "This was it," and because it's naturally who it's a part of who I'm inclined to be. And so I was like, wow. So I wasn't shocked when Shae said it. So it's been there's this thing where you have to, this is why you journal and why you really pay attention to what God is showing you. Because like you said, Alicia, he's been preparing me from the time I said, I don't like Shae Bynes. Y'all know I didn't like Shae at one time. So to the moment when he said she's going to be your mentor. And I said, but God, I don't like her. And she's younger than me. How's she going to mentor me? Not understanding what a mentor was at the time. Right. And so it's just been this whole preparation thing. So when she, begins to talk to me about different things, and I was like, she was in my box the week before last. And I was like, why are you telling me? She was like, well, you need to know. I said, well, no, not really. Yes, you do. No, which means she may not know, but the Holy Spirit is preparing for another level.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I think that when I think about this kind of big picture for everyone listening and just kind of walking the various things that God puts on your heart to do, that element of trust and knowing, so God is provision himself. And so when you walk in that, like when you're like, okay, you're sensing that there's a shift coming, there's a transition coming, you don't exactly know what it's going to look like, but being willing to continue to take steps in that direction, just as God's, put on your heart to do, trusting, knowing that there's an answer already, even if you don't know what it is yet. Like you can take those steps in faith, like we're always talking about, taking the steps in faith, one step at a time, knowing that the answer is already done. It's already prepared, even if it hasn't been revealed to you yet, And I think that that's been our testimony with everything, frankly, and certainly with this podcast and the transition.
Yeah, that was good. That was a good question, Alicia.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I'll just add to that is like in that process of, there's been so many times when I've seen where people or circumstances didn't know they were being prepared for that. I can say that I'm an example of that. Is like, I didn't know what God was preparing for me. And there's something, you talked about the showing up authentically and that being so good for the podcast. That's something I've learned, and I get you too. So, and Latara is my mentor. So nobody demonstrates and models authenticity like Latara. Like she doesn't know how to be anything other than who God created her to be.
Facts.
Even when it may feel like this is so pretty. But I think that's what's been so good about life of the past, is being able to see the good, bad, and the ugly. And people can relate to that because they have an understanding that this is what real life looks like. There's not anywhere in no promise in the Bible that says your life is going to look perfect like what we see on television. So that's something I love about what we've gone through here and how God has prepared the way and grown the podcast and grown the KDE community. So that's just my 2 cents.
Good stuff.
That's good. I love that. Shae, what has been your what have been your top 5 best moments about being a podcast host?
Oh, I'm glad you didn't ask me about episodes. Okay. So top 5 things around being a host. All right. So one of those, these are not necessarily in order, just the order that they're coming to me. So one of those things is hearing and being able to uncover people's stories, because I find that there's transformation found within people's stories. And right on the tail of that, one of the biggest delights for me as a host is when that guest says to me, either in the middle of the conversation, right on the podcast, or after, and says, I've never shared that before. Like I've never talked about this before, or I never get to talk about this. That is a highlight to me, right? Because it's like, so you're a business owner doing your thing, and yet you've never had the opportunity to give the gift of your story. And so to be able to facilitate that is super special. So that's on the behalf of the person who is the guest. I get the enjoyment of the fact that I got to facilitate that. And then the listeners get the benefit of the transformation that's in their story, right? So those are kind of two things entwined. Three, I would say as a kid, and Phil will tell you, I'm sure I've shared this before. Like I thought I was gonna have a radio show, and I used to play like being a DJ. And so when Phil and I were dating in high school, I would do like the Quiet Storm, and I'd be like the Quiet Storm, and I'd be a little DJ, and I'd put a little set together and to have a conversation. So doing podcasting for me, I'm not doing radio per se, but this idea of being able to communicate on the microphone in this way with audio was always super fun for me. It's why I missed it so much when I was no longer the host for this podcast, is because that's how much I love this, the platform of being able to communicate audio. So I'd say that was 3. 4 would be relationships that developed as a result of like the podcast conversation was a catalyst for a relationship. So there's many people that I met for the first time interviewing them on the podcast, and we are in relationship now, or we've collaborated on things now, or whatever. We're in each other's lives now. And so that's been a really great gift. Some people go into podcasting just for that reason alone, because they're like, there's people I want to have conversations with, and I know this opens up a door for relationship development in a really authentic, non-invasive way, right? That wasn't my reason to do a podcast, but it's been certainly a benefit of being a podcast host. So that's 4. And then 5 is being able to read the testimonies of listeners. I think when I went to, this just happened, when I went to, I'm gonna cry, Lord. So when I just went to South Africa, and I'm in South Africa, and a woman comes up to me at the end of the event, and she came and found Phil and I, and she's just like, "It's so good to meet you. I've been listening to your podcast for years." And I'm in South Africa. Like, it was just, it was a moment, right? And I remember when I had that moment, the very first time in the early stages of the podcast, when I was in Redding, California, and the guy from Mexico said, "Hey, look what I'm listening to on my phone," And in those moments, and then when people share their stories or testimonies of their favorite episodes, that's life-giving for me personally. And so that's been a reward of just being willing to be consistent and share people's stories, including my own.
That's good. And that's about that impact piece as well, too. The impact,
yeah, you have no idea.
Right? You have no idea.
You have no idea how God's gonna use it, where it's gonna go. The doors that it opens, the transformation it leads for other people. I got to tell you, the relationships that other people develop because they listen to the podcast. I have story after story after story after story of, hey, we're working together because I listened to the podcast and I reached out, and now we're in business together. Or, oh, this person I'm doing this with. Like, I get those stories all the time. And when I think about the fact that what I get to find out about, those stories, the things that I get to hear about because people actually tell me, is a mere tiny fraction of the reality of the impact. I'm only getting to experience and see this much of it.
Yeah.
And that's a delight. But there's way more. It's like, it's overwhelming in the best way to think about how much more, based off of how awesome it is for the little bit that that I do get to have view into.
Yeah, that's so good. That is so. You have another question, Alicia? You give us some good questions.
I practiced. No, I don't have another question. I just want to add to that. Is same with me, just as being a podcast guest prior to you leaving the hosting of it, Shae, is just I've gotten so many emails and messages, and I'm a little shameless plug here. I'm so sorry if I don't get back to somebody quickly who messages me, messages on like all the places, and so I'll just randomly find one a month or two later. But it's just been it's been such a blessing to my heart. I have to say, even though it feels random to me, messages, they're so encouraged to know that me sharing my story could help someone else. Every time I get one of those messages, it's in a moment when I need it desperate. It's really cool how that's worked.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. That has what I've gotten. I've gotten some messages as a guest from people, and it really has. It makes me say, I'm doing what the Lord is telling me to do. I am influencing, which means I'm bringing impact to somebody's life. And I sit and I go, wow, girl, you this good. You good, girl. Just keep doing what you're doing, right? It's a reminder. And they always come at just the right time for me when I'm doubting, or I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this stuff no more. Blah, 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 blah. And I get these messages. Or why did I say that? I listened back to a podcast that I've been on. I'm like, did I say that? But then I get a comment about that very thing I said, and people go, I needed that in that moment. And that's what makes things like this podcast so powerful, is that there's that authenticity again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's power in that. The power is not in the mask wearing and the posturing and the all that stuff. That is not always ill-intentioned. Sometimes it's just out of insecurities or feeling like you need to position yourself a certain way. But the power really comes in the authenticity and and in that vulnerability. Transparency has its layers, right? But I mean, we can have a whole podcast conversation about transparency, vulnerability, and authenticity. But that vulnerability is really huge.
Yeah,
really
that's
huge.
good. So early on at the beginning of the top of the hour, when we started this show, we mentioned your podcast that's going to be launching soon, and it's Kingdom Over Everything, right? And can you tell us a little bit about what to expect with it? Because I know it's like a plethora of conversations and topics.
Yeah. So a couple of these things I'm still making a decision about, but I can tell you the things that I know. So the reason why it's Kingdom Over Everything is because the whole premise of the show is around how do we engage the world around us with a kingdom lens, right? And so it's not just about kingdom business, kingdom entrepreneurship. It's also about a kingdom lens on things we're dealing with in culture, a kingdom lens. We're about to have in the United States, we're about to have a whole political season come up. How do we handle kingdom over our party preferences? How do we navigate that? How do we navigate some of the family things? So it's really about providing a platform for me to share just practically that kingdom lens over so many different areas. And so I believe it's going to be a combination of me sharing. I think it's a combination of kind of three things. One is me just sharing on particular topics that, I really have on my heart to share about, but also allowing people to submit their questions and allowing some of the episodes to be really driven by providing a kingdom lens based off of the question that they submitted. How would you look at this particular situation or this particular thing going on or whatever from a kingdom lens? And then thirdly, there will be some interviews in it. Unlike when I was doing Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur podcast, it was all interview based. This one isn't interview based at all, but it will include interviews.
Yeah, I was wondering about that just the other day. I was like, I have to ask her if she's going to be interviewing.
Yeah, I will, as it makes sense based off of what we're talking about. Like there's particular topics already that I'm like, I already know I'm going to have this guest because I want to talk to them about, their perspective on this. I'm going to share mine, but I want to have a conversation with them around theirs. So even when I'm doing interviews, they're not really, I always felt like I wasn't interviewing, I was having a conversation. But in these cases, it for real is a conversation. So in many cases, I'm having a conversation with a friend of mine, a peer of mine that was like, hey, you think about this stuff all the time. I think about this stuff all the time. Let's just kind of riff, right? And so I'm looking forward to it. I thought it was going to be something that was going to be in 2024, but man, like it got it was like I was getting so full of stuff that I started journaling it out. Like, oh my gosh, I got so many things on my heart. So I just started writing it out. And then I said, maybe this will help somebody. So I wrote it all out. And then I'm like, okay, Lord, all this stuff's on my heart, but like, why? Like, is this because some of this is for now? Is this for later? Is this for me to just sit with you about? Or like, why is it so much? And I went through that. And the majority of the things were because you're to release that. Right. So it's just like, okay, and there's some of the things where I want you to sit with me on that. Right. And so I moved up the date by probably several months of when I intended to do it, for the podcast.
So when does it launch?
What's that?
When does it launch?
September. I should have had that because I should have known you were going to ask me that. It's in September. It's in the second week of September, but I can't remember the exact date.
Okay, so second week of September. Okay, good. Now you also are you have a platform on Substack as well too, and Substack is almost like a blog platform for you all who don't know. Tell us a little bit about that and what we can get if we go over there. It's good stuff, but you tell the people.
Yeah, so I started this blog called Catalytic Conversations, and real talk, I have no idea exactly where this is going. I was just doing the thing that needed to be done in the moment. And so the conversations I've been having there and been writing about have been specifically conversations with people who would, you know, market themselves as kingdom business coaches, kingdom business consultants, or strategists or advisors, specifically people who are like, I serve the kingdom entrepreneur to help them to start, grow, or scale a business, right? And I've had multiple messages, It started with an open letter that I wrote on Facebook that went a mini viral, probably my most viral post I've ever had in 13 years of, or 15 years of Facebook, which led to a whole series of conversations around, you know, messages that need to be had, you know, for us in this space to maintain the purity of God's heart and his intent and his ways, his character, when we're going to say that something is kingdom entrepreneurship or kingdom business, and just really making sure there's alignment there. One of the things that God has, I don't remember whether I've shared about this at all. But one of the things God's made super, super duper clear to me is that one of the things I'm called to from an apostolic perspective, you know, that stewarding culture side is in that space, that stewarding the culture of what we call kingdom entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
Even though this is kingdom driven kingdom entrepreneurship should be kingdom driven. So essentially, even the phrase kingdom entrepreneurship should in essence be kingdom driven entrepreneurship. And so stewarding culture around what that looks like and his heart and mind around that, so that we're having alignment, because it is kind of messy out here in these spaces, is just part of the assignment right now. It's just to be a voice of alignment and graceful agitation.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing that, and I don't know exactly where all of that's going, but it's been an interesting month and a half on that.
That's good. That's really, really good.
If you follow me on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on Instagram, you will see me posting on those. Yeah.
So I have one more question. Alicia, you have a question? Because I have one more question.
I was just going to point something out. So I'll point this out and then you ask your question, is that if you know, for those of you who are listening, what Shae just said is that I may not know where we're going with this thing, but God said, do it. So I'm doing it. And so if you're wondering how I can get to the point where I'm seeing progress and momentum and growth in my business, so often we see in part and we prophesy in part. We don't know the whole story, but we do know what God told us to do right now. So I just want to encourage you, if you're listening and you're wondering what happens next, is what did God tell you to do? You may not know the result, but if you walk out on obedience, the thing God told you to do, that you'll be 10 years down the road telling your story of success, of what God has done with you and how he grew something that you were faithful with.
Woo, man. You know, I've been avoiding, I'm gonna ask this question here in a minute, but I've been avoiding, right? Because that's been, when you were talking, I was like, yeah, I get it, because I've been there. I call myself God's yes girl. But Latara stepped out of play for a minute for a little while earlier this year. And I was like, man, we need to really understand that. We need to do a whole show around that, Alicia. But my reluctance has been, I'm gonna cry like a baby. But it's necessary, because what Shae said is so important. When God tells you to do it, move. You don't know what it's going to look like on the other side. Shae didn't know. She knew that there would be longevity in the podcast, but she didn't know that everything would shift like it has, or that, you know, because another thing that really, when I was learning, I was taking over, I was like, well, do I keep it like Shae did? I don't know. She had a lot of guests, and God was like, no. What did you say the vision was?
Right.
And what happens on those type of shows? Well, they talk about a myriad of things. They do. That's what you're going to do.
Yes.
Because he placed that in my heart. It's just, you know, But we need to have that conversation. So yeah, so one day the father of the movement gonna have to step aside while the aunties of the movement have a
Aunties. I love it. I love it.
while the aunties have a whole conversation, right? Wow, that hit me. So I'm writing notes. That's what happens when you are podcasting. You go, oh, that's a good episode. I need to see what we can do. So Shae, and for those of you who are just hopping on, I want to know, how long have you been listening to the podcast? This podcast, how many years? So Shae, just one more question. With the elevation of what's happening within, because KDE is going through some elevation. How we know we're going through elevation? We having some growing pains. That's how we know we're going through elevation, right? Yes. And so what's happening? What's going on with KDE? I mean, you made a kind of an announcement last week on Facebook, so I figured, hey, why not talk about it?
Are you talking about the South Africa update?
Yes. What are we doing?
Okay, so let me tell you, there's a whole listen, we at the top of the hour. I got a whole thing to say. Okay.
We good. We can go over sometimes.
Because there's a lesson up in here. All right, I'm gonna tell you a quick story. South Africa. The Lord spoke to me about the nation of South Africa in January of 2014 in the shower. All right. And I was like, I got excited. This was very early in Kingdom Driven Entrepreneur history. And Alicia remembers this because I was like, we're going to go to South Africa. We had our our very first Phoenix event. And it was just amazing. God moved in just crazy, not crazy, just awesome ways. And so I was like, we're going to go to South Africa. And so we're going to do a retreat and we're going to do a missions trip. We're going to mix it all together. I was so excited. Alicia was so excited. We were all so excited. Put that thing out there. Everyone's so excited. And then nobody signed up. So I was like, oh, okay. So maybe I got that wrong. I don't know why God's talking to me about South Africa. And then nobody's trying to go to South Africa. People like the idea of going to South Africa, but nobody's saying, hey, I'm gonna pay money to go to South Africa. So I just let it sit. Years later, South Africa's coming up for me again. And now check this out. My husband had, past tense, no interest in traveling abroad. He's like, I'll be at home, baby, you can go, all of those things. Now check this out. So my husband was never really interested in that. And so even the things that were kind of bubbling up in my heart around South Africa felt a little bit odd, out of alignment too, because my husband would be happily say, you go, baby. But I mean, what if I was supposed to go multiple times or what, so there was kind of a little bit of, I'm just going to let that sit. Lord, I don't know why you're still talking to me about that, but I'm just going to let that sit and just kind of ponder these things in my heart. Right. Fast forward years. At the end of last year, I talked to Phil about going to South Africa with Dub, our friend Dub, with School of Kingdom and all of that. And I was talking about myself because I already knew he was going to be like, go ahead, babe. And when I brought it up to him, he said, yes, we should go. And I'm like, miracle number one, the fact that he said we. Then we go to South Africa. And while we're in South Africa, one of the last days we were there, my husband's sitting there, we're over breakfast, and he's looking at me, he's like, yeah, I can see God's up to something here. I could see us actually spending maybe even a few months here. I really see, oh my goodness, I could see property here. We may be having a headquarters here. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, what is happening? Miracle number two. Now, mind you, from the December timeframe, getting close to when we went, which was in June, all of a sudden, I'm getting messages from people in South Africa who want to have conversations about this and that, right? I even got a chance to meet one of those people when I was in South Africa. Since I've been back from South Africa, people are just like, oh, let me connect you with this person and that person and that person. And so it was like when my husband's heart was connected to what God desired to see happen in South Africa, a floodgate opened. And so when we got back from South Africa, all these things that Phil was talking about was things that have been bubbling up in my heart for years, just stewing there. And I wasn't taking action on them because it just didn't make sense, right? So now like in a couple of days here, I'm about to, I have a little, I think around 60 something folks, South African Kingdom entrepreneurs that have been invited to hang out with me this Friday. I'm going to be talking to them. I'm going to be mentoring 15 of them, 7 or 8 in Johannesburg, 7 or 8 in Cape Town. I'm going to be going back to South Africa. It looks like Phil's probably going to be coming too, and at next spring. And God's just like rapidly showing me more and more vision around what he desires to do that starts in South Africa. So much so that I have bought the domain name KDEAfrica.com and KDESouthAfrica.com because it starts in South Africa, but that's going to be a catalyst for other nations that he has already shown me. For if he showed Tony 2 nations, he had shown me one of the ones that he showed Tony. Tony always sees more than I see. So it was just like, so there's probably like these 3 nations that it starts in South Africa to sort of watch, oh Lord have mercy, to watch how when my husband, the father of the movement, not just my husband, but the father of the movement, when he stepped into that and then stepped into an agreement with, okay, well, I can see God's doing something. It unlocked. And instead of me being agitated and frustrated or trying to force stuff or grind stuff to happen in South Africa for the past several years, I let that thing sit. Somebody needs to hear me. I let that thing sit. And not in frustration, by the way, just in, I'm just going to ponder these things on my heart. And it would just come up from time to time. And I would just kind of write. And to watch God, like, I can't wait to see a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 and 10 years from now, what's going on because of what got unlocked when we were just in South Africa. And it's getting really hot in my office right now.
That means a lot because, man, I see nations, I see continents, and I just, like I just saw a whole other continent. And I was like, "Ooh, that one," but I'm not gonna say nothing. So not right now.
You should tell me my box story. It may be something we've already talked about. Like there's like God's up to some stuff. I mean, he's not playing around this movement of kingdom entrepreneurs, this marketplace, people in the marketplace, moving, doing business with WITH, him.
That's so good.
He's not playing around. He's not playing about it.
So good. So it won't be another 6 months before you're back, but
I would be delighted to come back before 6 months. I'm so glad to have the honor to come back and hang out with you guys today.
My boxer talking about, am I gonna be coming back?
I don't want to beg, but I don't know. I'm kind of a co-founder. Maybe it would be nice if I got to show up from time to time.
I want to make sure that you come back, especially once this thing begins to grow with Africa, South Africa. Coming back in. There you go. See, you'll be that repeat guest because the story is unfolding.
Yeah, we are just
like Alicia's did.
Yes. And what's wild is watch the Redeemer of time. So all these things have been just kind of like stewing. Watch how rapidly certain things move where it feels like we're catching up. Like we are catching up. Yeah. Right. To what he's already done it up to. But it's that agreement is everything.
Yeah.
The alignment, the agreement is everything.
Yeah. It's already there. I keep telling people God is not still writing your story. This is already written.
Already
you just got to step into it. That's it.
Yeah. And the tempo of the grace around this thing is a quick tempo right now. So good. We're flowing.
Woo! Created for the works which he prepared for us beforehand. That's what the scripture says. We are created for the works which he prepared for us beforehand. Yes. I think that's important is that it's already been prepared. The timing might not be here yet, but the work has already been prepared.
Woo, man. Which means y'all don't, which totally annihilates the grind story. We could be here for a whole another hour. Totally annihilates.
I'm like, you better give away some prize and end this. It's getting super.
Y'all.
I'm burning up in the office here. So,
we have stuff we're giving away. We're giving away access to master classes and different courses that we have. And what I'm going to do, I was thinking about is how we're going to do this. Is I'm going to let you all choose what it is that you want. Right? I'm giving away a $25 Amazon gift card. So everybody like Amazon. I think just about. So I'm going to put my email address here in the comments. I'll say it too, but I'm going to put it in here so you can contact me. And only if you're live and listen, I'm going to call your name so I'll know whether or not it was you. Everybody can't contact me. Okay. Don't do it. So, so there was someone who was on earlier, and I don't know if she's still on here or not. KB Michelle Green. I need for you to reach out. My email is latara@kingdomdrivenentrepreneur.com. KB like, yep, I'm here right now. So KB Michelle Green, contact me, and I'm going to give you a list of what you can choose from. All right. And whatever you choose, you're going to get access to. Okay. And there was someone else who was on here. Let's see if she is still on here. Texas Lovely Lady. Are you still here? Texas Lovely Lady, are you still here? Okay, she must not still be here. So I'm sorry. This has got to be live to win, right? Now I do know, however, that Lady Armor Jury is still here because she typing up a storm over here. She loving this content. She loving it, right? Jada, can you type my email address in, please? latara@kingdomdrivenentrepreneur.com. So you guys reach out and contact me. I'm sorry, host, I know you here, you're commenting, but you're not eligible. So because you're a host. Awesome. So you guys contact me. I believe Jada's going to pop my email address in there. Contact me now so you can make your choice. Your prizes, again, we have KDE Masterclass. I think there's a supernatural productivity course that's really, really good. Everything Shae does is good. Everything, we're blessed. We have such an awesomely, supernaturally led team, and we have some wisdom and some knowledge and some skills that are out of this entire world because it's kingdom.
It's kingdom.
And you can have a $25 gift card. Now I'm only giving away one of those, so you got to snatch them up fast, right? Dory said, "Oh well," laugh out loud. "Oh well." I meant to tell y'all last week, y'all can't win, but I'm glad you here. That we have our host in the audience. Brandon was here. Dory was here. Thank you guys so much for listening in. Yeah, so good, so good. Alicia, Shae, you know what? Phil gonna be like, y'all get on there, y'all go way over the hour.
we would have finished on time if you didn't open up a can on South Africa.
I know, right? But we get together, the three of us. There's some kind of supernatural fire up in there, and I love it, and I love you guys so much, much. Jada, you have anything? I'm not Jada. Alicia, you have anything?
Well, I mean, some of you might have noticed my dad says hello.
Hey, Dad.
Hey, Dad.
Hey. All right, listen, everybody. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great episode. Yes, we'll have Shae back again because when Shae is here, more y'all be on here. I'm going to just mess with y'all right now. When Shae comes, you come. So why not bring her on again, right? Because we'll have a more lively audience. I love it. See? Jada said that my name is synonymous with authenticity. And look at, here come the cat.
I heard you. I was listening in the car. Talking that noise.
I don't care. I don't care. All right, y'all. This has been good. It's been all gravy. Shae, thank you so much for joining. I love you all. Have an awesome day, everyone.
Take care.